When the new Godzilla was first announced in 2010, complete with a studio behind it that was responsible for films like Inception and Jonah Hex, as well as concept art for what the new Godzilla would look like, I was split down the middle with what to expect. It was quite easy to get excited for an image like this, but it was also easy to pass it off as one more attempt to reboot a once popular franchise. It wasn't until 2013 rolled around that I actually began to gain more details and pay more attention to the film's development, whether they were behind the scenes photos, cast and crew announcements, or the godlike teaser. I had a lot more optimism than I would normally have for a reattempted franchise, whilst also not getting my hopes up too high. Then the movie happened. Yeah, it happened. Needless to say, I was disappointed. But then I was asked, why? The film had so much promise, the trailers were perfect, the posters were ominous, the team behind it actually knew what they were doing. How could you say it was disappointing? I was disappointed in Godzilla 2014 because it wasn't about Godzilla. And no, this is not merely an argument describing his lack of appearance in the movie, which, by the way, there's a lack of Godzilla appearance in the movie. This is an argument that hopes to explain why Godzilla 2014 was an utter disappointment because Godzilla 2014 is not about Godzilla, and to me, is barely a Godzilla movie at all. Now, the first reaction I usually get when it comes to this viewpoint is the childish backlash of, "You're not a real Godzilla fan if you didn't like the new Godzilla." I think I know how Buzz Aldrin feels now when people tell him that the moon landings were fake.
I went to the goddamn moon!
In all honesty, the original Godzilla is a character and film franchise that has been a part of my life since I learned how to walk. Whether it was the historically significant original, the strangely colored sequels of the 60s and 70s, or the highly underrated Godzilla 1985, I was constantly watching a badly dubbed Japanese movie about a giant radioactive dinosaur. How many kids are able to say that? But of course none of that matters because I didn't like the 2-hour-long no-show about a soldier wanting to get back to his family. Yeah, okay. So let's begin to try to understand why Godzilla was a disappointment. Now, of course, this is something that has been argued again and again, but let's actually pay attention this time. Let's compare the amount of screen time between Godzilla 1954 and Godzilla 2014. When rounded up, 1954 contains 14 minutes and 2014 contains 9. So somehow, Godzilla has more screen time in the less than $1 million budget black and white hour and 40 minutes 1954 version than he does in the multi-million dollar 2-hour-long 2014 version. Now you may argue that the difference between the two screen times is not that much, and you're right, it's not. But keep in mind that a minute goes by like that when watching a movie. Even if 1954 had more Godzilla on screen by just a few minutes, the scenes were slower paced and it makes every minute count. Ask yourself this, if you went to a concert hosted by your favorite band, but because of unforeseen circumstances they were only able to play for a short period of time, would you rather they give a 9-minute performance or a 14-minute performance? If you said 9, then congratulations! Here's some Godzilla 2014 posters that I don't know what the fuck to do with anymore. What adds insult to injury in this case is not only the lack of screen time, but it's the fact that Godzilla doesn't show up in the movie for an hour. The problem is that when the rest of your movie focuses on a family I'm not attached to, a desperate widowed father who was taken out of the movie way too soon, and Ken Watanabe who is just barely a saving grace, I become so frustrated that by the time we actually get to Godzilla, by the time we get to a fight, by the time we get to the atomic breath, all I can do is roll my eyes and sigh. Now, this wasn't the case with the movie itself. It wasn't a matter of me constantly waiting for 2014 that by the time I got to it I was bored with it. The issue was that what I got were scenes with Godzilla that constantly cut to something else. Yes, this is why I came to see Godzilla, to watch a boy sitting on a couch sticking his tongue out at a TV. It's almost as if the cameraman is thinking, well, I've gotten bored with that, let's see what these guys are up to. So when you pay attention to the significance of screen time, you can begin to see,
Cruz, have you ever seen Jaws?
yes,
Have you ever seen Alien?
yes,
Have you ever seen Cloverfield?
yes, Cloverfield, really?
Well, if you did, then you would understand that in order to build suspense, you hide the monster as much as possible until the very end. Otherwise, the audience isn't surprised.
Let me ask you something. What do all those films have in common?
They all have monsters in them.
They're all horror movies.
I wouldn't consider Cloverfield a horror movie.
Shut up! Of course you build up suspense in a horror movie. Of course you hide the monster as much as possible. But is Godzilla a horror movie? No. Granted, the original Godzilla has been considered a sci-fi horror movie due to the images of destruction and terror as well as the historical significance. But Godzilla 2014 does not even come close to being labeled a horror movie. Sci-fi action? Sure. Monster movie? Sure. Horror?
I don't think so.
In addition to a majority of websites that classify the original as horror and drama, nowhere am I able to find a website that says the same for 2014. But apart from the horror movie connection, the reason why someone should not compare Godzilla 2014 to films like Alien, Jaws, and Cloverfield is because the monsters in Alien, Jaws, and Cloverfield were never seen before. Of course you're going to hide a monster that the audience has never seen before because it allows their imagination to fill in the blanks. You may argue that people have seen a shark before, but not in the kind of execution that Jaws had. Godzilla has been around for 60 years. We know what he looks like. We know what he's going to look like. We know what he's going to do. What is the use in hiding Godzilla when you have explained in interviews that he is the largest he has ever been in Godzilla history and not show him? If you want to build up Godzilla, do it with the trailers, do it with the posters. Don't do it for an hour and a half of the movie. Disappointment number 2. It's not about Godzilla. Take away the fact that there was only 9 minutes of screen time, the rest of the movie's focus has barely anything to do with Godzilla, and it's one of the major reasons I don't like the film. It's not the screen time, it's the focus. Should Gareth Edwards have shown more of his titular monster? Not necessarily, but he shouldn't have made him a narrative afterthought in his own reboot. The original Godzilla may have had only 14 minutes of screen time, but guess what's going on for the rest of the movie? Everyone's lives are affected by Godzilla. How do we get rid of him? Should we get rid of him? How was he created? Where will he attack next? Emiko is torn between respecting her father's fascination with the monster, her love for Ogata and Serizawa, and the promise she has to break when revealing Serizawa's oxygen destroyer. Dr. Serizawa has to decide whether or not to use his invention on Godzilla, because if he does, what are the chances of the government using his invention for warfare? Which also connects to what happened with the atomic bomb and how Godzilla represents the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, in addition to the victims we see caused by Godzilla's destruction. What was 2014 about? Joe Brody, his son, and Serizawa discover the Mutos. Serizawa talks about why they exist, mentions Godzilla, and from then on, the story follows Ford Brody and Serizawa following the monster's path to San Francisco, where the military plans to destroy them with a nuclear missile. Don't know why the fuck they're doing that when they feed off of radiation, and Serizawa wants Godzilla and the Mutos to fight. Is Godzilla there? Sure. Is his existence and his actions the focus of the story? No. While Godzilla is swimming in the ocean, the Mutos are destroying Vegas, fighting the military, destroying trains. Oh, and by the way, Godzilla's here to fight. So I wouldn't really call this Godzilla. I'd call this Godzilla versus Muto. In fact, if this movie were made during the Heisei era of Godzilla movies in the 90s, and was cut down by half an hour, it would totally fit. Let's compare Godzilla 2014, a movie that doesn't focus on Godzilla or his origin, but instead focuses on 2 giant flying monsters in tandem that he ends up fighting, to Godzilla vs. Mothra: The Battle for Earth from 1992, a movie that doesn't focus on Godzilla or his origin, but instead focuses on 2 giant flying monsters in tandem that he ends up fighting. Like many other versus movies of the past, the point was not to focus on Godzilla or build up his appearance because we already knew who he was and what he did. Instead, the focus was on the new monster he was going to fight and how the main characters dealt with the monster as well as their own lives. 2014 focused on the Mutos, which, by the way, I really enjoyed. Seeing a brand new gigantic monster crawl its way out of the earth as you look up at it in awe on the big screen was a lot of fun for me, because I love giant monsters that I can see. So they focus on the Mutos, okay, we got that. Do we have main characters dealing with the monster in their own lives? Yes and no. The only 2 characters in 2014 that I felt warranted any interest were Joe and Serizawa, or Cranston and Watanabe, it's just easier to say somehow. The reason why is because they were both passionate scientists studying the creatures, and they had both suffered great losses either from giant monsters or from man-made disasters. Ford Brody, his wife, son, and that forgettable assistant played by a woman who had no idea what Godzilla was about.
He doesn't know how to express himself except eating people, I suppose, I don't know. Eating people, I suppose, I don't know.
Are bland characters. The only things that we really know about them are, he's a soldier, she's a nurse, he's a kid, a dead-eyed kid. They're completely forgettable. Toho's Godzilla movies may have been somewhat cheesy, but at least their characters were interesting and had something to do with the overall story. In Godzilla vs. Mothra, Takuya is an archaeologist who, with the help of his ex-wife and a businessman, discovers Mothra's egg, the cosmos, and the origin of Mothra and Batra. They all decide to protect the egg and the cosmos. Throughout the film, Takuya begins reconciling with his ex-wife, the relationship with his daughter, and Ando stands up against his company in order to do what's right. They're all a part of the events in the movie, and they are all growing as characters. Almost every main character in the Heisei films has something to do with either Godzilla or the new monster. Now at this point you could argue that it's unfair to compare a reboot of Godzilla to all the other previous movies, to just look at it as a brand new creation and story. Well, I tried doing that too, and what happened was that I was frustrated by the concept of watching a movie called Godzilla that wasn't about the title character. If this was the first time Godzilla had made his appearance, I would have still been disappointed because of the story's lack of focus. But going back to the characters in 2014, you could argue that Brody was a part of the events, but not really, seeing as he's like every other soldier in the movie. He does get the boat out to sea to save San Francisco, well, what's left of San Francisco. Does that have anything to do with the monsters? Well, not really, considering the nuclear bomb shouldn't have been there in the first place. They feed off of God. And Brody's wife leaves her son with a coworker and then runs into a shelter.
She's gonna look after you just for a little bit. Daddy's gonna be here soon, and I'm gonna just come get you right after.
Like I said, the only characters that have any major role or influence are Cranston and Watanabe. What was my whole point with this again? Oh yeah, Godzilla vs. Muto would have been a much better title and would have worked a lot better if it came out in the 90s. Hang on, let me think about that one. What if it wasn't made in the 90s? What if 2014 was actually about how Cranston spends his whole life researching the Mutos in America after an American nuclear reactor accidentally kills his wife? And son, if that floats your boat. Meanwhile, Watanabe spends his whole life researching Godzilla in Japan. Throughout the course of the movie, we get scenes where the Mutos are destroying stuff in America, and we get scenes of Godzilla destroying Japan, and later the American West Coast. Scenes that don't have to be incredibly long and drawn out, but also not abrupt and fucking frustrating. Eventually, both the monsters and main characters meet up towards the climax of the movie. One monster from America and the scientists researching it, and one monster from Japan and the scientists researching it. Do you see what I'm getting at? Two brilliant minds from opposite sides of the world working together through their loss and their research against two monsters, or three, whatever, from opposite sides of the world who are gonna have a fulfilling final battle in San Francisco. Not only would it be an interesting connection in the story, but it would also represent how Toho's Japanese creation came to America for its own shot at a brand new movie. And in the end, Godzilla beats the shit out of the Mutos and proceeds to blow up San Francisco. No, he doesn't crawl back into the ocean and go, well, movie's over. No, he blows up San Francisco, signifying Watanabe's line that nature is not in man's control. Despite all of their attempts at destroying the monsters, only Godzilla would remain and proceed to destroy everything. Why? To show that he may have saved our lives, but he's still a threat. Because he's still Godzilla. He is a living, nuclear weapon who for some reason the writers chose not to have him destroy anything or kill anyone. Disappointment number 3. Godzilla 2014 is not Godzilla. Through my point of view and through the original movie, I believe that there are 5 requirements that a Godzilla movie must have in order to signify what Godzilla truly is. He kills people. People are afraid of him. He's connected to radiation. He destroys things purposely. And he is still an animal. For this segment, let's compare Godzilla 2014 to Godzilla 1985. Godzilla 1985 was made and takes place 30 years after the original Godzilla and serves both as a sequel and a reboot to the franchise, which promised to bring Godzilla back to his menacing and destructive roots. Godzilla 2014 was made 30 years after 1985 and serves as a reboot both to the Toho franchise and the American appeal, which promised to bring Godzilla back to his menacing and destructive roots. It may not be a sequel to the Toho films, but it does show how he was first sighted in 1954, and the character of Dr. Serizawa makes a return in the form of Watanabe. The major difference between the two is that 1985 possesses all 5 requirements, and 2014 does not. In fact, 1985 shows all 5 requirements in a 3-minute scene when Godzilla first makes his appearance. He kills people. Godzilla attacks a nuclear power plant, thus killing the employees. People are afraid of him. Yep, they're pretty fucking afraid of the giant radioactive dinosaur. He's connected to radiation. Godzilla absorbs the nuclear energy from the nuclear reactor. He destroys things purposely. He destroys the power plant to get to the reactor. He is still an animal. Godzilla notices birds flying out to sea and begins to follow them. The reason for this is the genetic connection to dinosaurs and birds. Godzilla was lured away from the power plant by the sound of the birds chirping, showing a part of his animalistic side. Everything that makes Godzilla what he is shown in less than 3 minutes. Let's look at 2014. He kills people / destroys things purposely. No, he does not. I cannot believe that a movie that has this poster and the tagline, "The world ends, Godzilla begins," had no one die on screen because of Godzilla or had him destroy anything. You could argue that the tidal wave certainly killed people, but was that accidental or on purpose? Yeah, okay, I'll admit it feels like I'm splitting hairs here, but the only implication of people dying because of Godzilla is this tidal wave. There's not a single scene where Godzilla is deliberately destroying buildings or killing civilians. He even goes out of his way twice to make sure he doesn't destroy naval ships. Excuse me, pardon me, just gonna swim underneath you here, you know, wouldn't want to destroy you or anything. I mean, that would make me a monster. I mean, who do you think I am, Godzilla? At first, I thought I remembered him at least stepping on a plane at the airport. Nope. When you make a trailer for a new Godzilla movie that implies that he is going to destroy almost everything, that implies an atmosphere of dark destruction caused by a monstrous behemoth the world has never seen. But to my surprise and utter disappointment, all of this buildup, all of these vistas of destruction we saw advertised were not done by Godzilla. San Francisco? Mutos. Las Vegas? Mutos. Train and railroad? Mutos. Nuclear power plant? Mutos. Airport? Yeah, you guessed it. Bottom line, Godzilla 2014 doesn't destroy anything. He fights the Mutos and saves the day, but ignores everything else.
Godzilla was my creature of choice. Oh yeah. I love the absolute destructive nature of this beast.
He doesn't cause any destruction, Cranston, and you're not even on screen with him. The explanation given in the movie as to why he's hunting the Mutos and not bothering with us is that he is the top of the food chain. He is the god of our ecosystem, and by destroying the Mutos, he is restoring balance. Then why not kill humans? The ecosystem would get along quite well without us, so why doesn't he destroy us? Because he can't be bothered? He's only supposed to balance nature in terms of things that are as big as he is? Instead of creating a story about a monster that encompasses nuclear destruction and human fragility, we have a story that's summed down to the big fish eats the little fish. If the only time that Godzilla is going to show up is to fight other monsters, then we have ourselves a pretty boring and benign monster. What happens in Godzilla 1985? He lights people on fire and throws a skyscraper onto 4 people. What happens in 2014? A skyscraper is thrown onto him. What a badass. People are afraid of him. No, they're not. Sure, he gets some shots of people looking up and running the other way, but there are no moments besides the screaming children who he protects where people are terrified of his presence. Because apparently he's the savior of San Francisco. He's connected to radiation. Nope. The Mutos feed off radiation. They also kill people and destroy things. People are also afraid of them. They're also still animals. How come Godzilla didn't do any of this? He's mutated by radiation, but they never say that he feeds off of it or needs it. He is still an animal. In the sense that he's hunting the Mutos? I guess, but apart from that, there's no other natural connection to either his dinosaur linkage or what humanity did to him. From what I've shown, Godzilla 2014 does not possess the original elements that made him what he is. Keep in mind, these requirements may change from person to person depending on how you see Godzilla. But from my perspective, these 5 elements are what makes him the living, breathing cautionary tale that he originally started as. That's what he is to me, and I believe that's what he was to Ishiro Honda and hundreds of Japanese audiences in 1954. And that was something that Gareth Edwards and his team said they were going to bring back. But through my findings, I have to say, I disagree with them. The image of Godzilla has, of course, evolved through time, from villain to hero to villain to anti-hero. And from what I've gathered from my analysis, very simply, he's gone back to a hero. But why? Why create an advertising campaign to build up the iconic Japanese monster with images of apocalyptic and disastrous devastation and barely have him in the movie? Why make it so that he doesn't kill or destroy anything? It was cool seeing new monsters join the roster, but why have them be the main attraction and make them do everything Godzilla should have done? And why is it that someone as creative as Gareth Edwards, who has expressed a huge passion for monster movies and Godzilla, made a movie that wasn't about Godzilla? Through my deductions, I believe all these questions can be answered because of Gareth Edwards himself. Keep in mind, he didn't write this movie, but with him being the director, the one person who makes the final call and majority of creative decisions, I believe he may be the reason for these faults. So why create this kind of advertising campaign and barely have Godzilla in the movie? Well, because Gareth's first movie, Monsters, was the same way. The point of Monsters was to focus on the main characters as much as possible to give it a human connection, as well as to show how mankind itself were the actual monsters when it came to segregating the alien species, as well as the Mexican civilians who wanted to leave their unsafe country. The monsters in the movie don't fully appear on screen until the very end. This kind of explains the lack of monster screen time and focus on characters in 2014. But how does this explain the Mutos? Somehow, the focus of Godzilla was centered on their behavior and destruction for the majority of the movie. So why were they given more screen time? Because I believe that Gareth wanted the opportunity to make another giant monster movie. Maybe one about how the last two creatures of a prehistoric species are struggling to procreate, but mankind steps in and destroys them. It would definitely fit in with Gareth's themes from Monsters. The problem is that a production company won't fund a monster movie called a Muto unless it has something that will guarantee box office sales. Take Pacific Rim, for example. It was pretty well received by audiences and critics, myself included, but domestically it was $90 million short of making its budget back. Compare that to Godzilla, which did make its budget back both domestically and in foreign box office. So why the difference in sales? Because of the name. Even the least interested of moviegoers will still pay to see a 2014 version of Godzilla. They may not have seen the Japanese films and can probably only remember the American version from '98, but they're familiar enough with the name to know what they're paying to see. Same thing with superhero movies. You don't need to be a comic book reader to know what you're going to get when watching Spider-Man or the Avengers. They're aware enough to make some kind of connection to a movie about a giant fire-breathing dinosaur. Sounds like blockbuster fun to them, but a movie about giant robots fighting sea monsters? I don't know, that sounds kinda iffy. What happens if I put the title Transformers on there? 2 tickets, please! So how would Gareth get his opportunity to make his new monster movie? By calling it Godzilla. Now, I don't believe he intended to do this. According to him, he got the phone call asking if he'd like to direct a new version of Godzilla, and that he was both nervous and excited for the opportunity. But at the same time, I believe he found an open opportunity to include his own monster idea whilst also incorporating something new into the reboot. Unfortunately, he forgot to include Godzilla in a lot of the movie, and not just his screen time, but his purpose. Which brings me to the last question. Why did Godzilla go back to being a hero? Well, in regards to Gareth's view on Godzilla, is this the 1954 Godzilla, who is deadly and horrible, or more like the humanized ally who emerges in the 70s movies? Godzilla's an anti-hero. He started as the enemy and in the later films became the good guy. In our film, it's not black or white. I wanted people to be afraid and have that reaction. You wouldn't be cheering if he really turned up, and we try to keep it that way. Really? You did? It's pretty black and white when Godzilla doesn't cause harm to anyone in your movie. He's the punishment we deserve, you know? What punishment are you talking about? Godzilla is a metaphor for Hiroshima in the original movie. We try to keep that, and there are a lot of themes from the '54 movie that we've kept. To me, if all we did was just have the monster smashing things up, then the film would be pointless. Absolutely. I wouldn't want a Godzilla movie that was just pure action, but I do want that nuclear metaphor to be there. So where was it? Everyone who died from radiation or had anything to do with nuclear danger was caused by the Mutos. Godzilla doesn't represent any nuclear symbolism in the movie, and how is he supposed to when he's protecting humanity? So why the heroic change in nature? Well, as a boy growing up in Warwickshire in the centre of England, Edwards was familiar with the sillier incarnations, specifically the children's television cartoons starring the roaring lizard. You mean the Hanna-Barbera cartoon where Godzilla rises out of the ocean to protect humanity from a new monster every week and doesn't destroy anything? Yeah. On a final note, I don't have any anger towards Gareth Edwards. I was lucky enough to meet the guy, and what I took away was that he was a genuine creative filmmaker who loved his job and strived for the best he could do. His characters and stories need a lot of improvement, but the passion for filmmaking is there. When you look at a film, there's key emotions you're going to provoke. I'm always looking for where's the bit where they might tear up, even if it's not tearing up in a sad way, just that you're so much in awe of what you're looking at that you get goosebumps and you start to well up. Close Encounters of the Third Kind does that for me. Absolutely. Jurassic Park does that for me. Inception does that for me. Even the Mutos did that for me. But I wanted Godzilla to do that for me. Your trailers and posters promised he would do that. And yes, I know that trailers are not always an accurate representation of the movie. Battle Los Angeles did the exact same thing. A morbidly beautiful trailer showcasing a team of soldiers' last stand against a grittily realistic alien invasion. And then it turned out to be a bland sci-fi action movie with uninteresting characters and worn-out war movie tropes. But my point is, don't lie to your audience. What I honestly expected was Godzilla meets The Day After.
Don't bother with the bed just now. Eva, we've got to get down below. Listen. Those missiles have all gone off.
Can you imagine a Godzilla movie having that kind of drama and tone, but in a modern age? Okay, sure, you might be thinking that I'm asking for too much from a Godzilla movie, but when you make a trailer that looks like this,
He knew the world would not be the same. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
I don't think I can be blamed for expecting that. And if there's one positive thing I can say about 2014, is that without it, we probably wouldn't have had a plethora of original Godzilla movies released on Blu-ray. It made me incredibly happy to see a Godzilla Blu-ray kiosk in the middle of Walmart. It was like I was 3 years old again when I got my first Godzilla VHS from Walmart. Both the 60th anniversary and the new movie has helped bring Godzilla back, and I really appreciate it. But don't promise us a performance from our favorite band, then have them play only one song. Don't call it Godzilla when the movie is about Aaron Taylor Johnson fighting prehistoric bats. Don't make it appear as though Godzilla is going to destroy everything, then have him save the day, as if you were adapting the Hanna-Barbera cartoon or the kid-friendly movies. Unfortunately, that's the movie we got. Is it the Godzilla I want? Not unless I'm back in the 70s. Is it the Godzilla we need? I would personally say no, considering that nuclear war is still an issue, and having Godzilla return to those dangerous roots might shed a little more light into nuclear destruction in a modern age. Is it the Godzilla other people want? Maybe. A lot of people don't seem to care about his lack of presence in the film, nor his lack of nuclear embodiment. Likewise, a majority of people did care that the film lacked everything that I brought up. Everyone seemed to become split down the middle into what has now become a childish fight of nuh-uh and yeah-huh. If you enjoy the movie, that's totally cool. I just hope that when looking at all I've analyzed, that you'll think more about whether or not this version of Godzilla has the same quality, merit, and meaning as the previous ones, or at least the original. And if you didn't enjoy the movie, then I hope the analysis was able to help discover why you didn't, or bring up new ideas you hadn't thought of before. I don't think 2014 is a bad movie. It's shot very well and it looks interesting, but it's a disappointing Godzilla movie. It'd be much easier if it turned out to be decent, or even if it just plain sucked. What I never expected was for it to not be about Godzilla, and that to me is just sad. Nuclear. Nuclear. I don't care.